I've just stopped here behind the first camera position. The rabbits have been busy. They've scraped up pieces of lead ore and pieces of charcoal. Dr. Richard Smith first found this along with his wife Beryl, and Richard had the charcoal radiocarbon dating. It came out at AD 10 to AD 1080, so at the time of the Norman Conquest, which is the earliest datable mining that we've got on this site. So it gives us 1,000 years. Obviously, at its simplest, all the Bale Hill was, it was a pile of timber, faggots of wood, and on top of that the miners placed the lead ore in order to smelt the lead from the ore. Now, the smelting process is quite complicated. It goes through several phases, but at its simplest, lead ore, which is lead sulphide, commonly called galena, it's a bright grey mineral. So as the lead ore was heated, they drove off the sulphur in the form of sulphur dioxide. The lead then combined with oxygen from the air to form lead oxide. The lead oxide was then further smelted, further heated in the presence of charcoal from the timber. The carbon combined with the oxygen from the lead oxide to form carbon dioxide, which was driven off, leaving lead. The lead just trickled down through the fire and collected its base to probably make a hollow, and it formed a primitive type of pig of lead. Now this site's very small. It's probably a single operation, maybe just used to get enough lead for one particular job rather than being an industrial bale hill. Bales in the Dales, they're always called bale hills, whereas in Derbyshire they're called bowls. Anyway, we'll move on from here along to the front of the knot over there, and I'll leave all the evidence here for the future. Here we are at the old mine. Just on the right hand side of the picture there is the knot. Ivy scar above. Ivy scar is made out of underset limestone. The underset limestone actually here is unusually thick. It's 50 feet thick. It's normally only about 30 feet. The knot is actually a piece of underset limestone from the scar above, or at least from this block of ground which has been taken away by glacial action. If you look across to the left hand side of the picture, you see a nick in the top of the scar there. The scar dips down 15 degrees, and then there's a nick, a bit of a shallow channel coming down. There's actually a fault in that part of the scar, but you can see the scar has dipped down against what would be unfavourable beds on the left hand side. There'll be shaly, gritty sort of beds, and that part of the vein wouldn't be productive. The mineralising solutions wouldn't have formed in that part of the vein. Come back up the slope of the scar. You go up above the knot, there's a bit of a groove and a slight niche. And that's actually knot vein. Another break in the rock, vertical fracture. That's been mineralised in the knot itself, and it's mineralised on the top edge of Ivy Scar going northwards. It's been worked by shallow workings on the top. Hopefully the camera will focus on this. It's a section of a vein, an idealised vein, in the Yorkshire series of rocks. The Yorkshire series are a series of alternating limestones, grits, plate, plate, grit, plate, grit, and so on. These fractures, where they fracture the rock, they're actually in the harder beds, the more competent beds, you get a vertical fracture. The vertical fracture there, the Preston grit, which is a very hard bed, and the main ore bearing bed was the main limestone. The main limestone isn't present here. The main limestone is away to the north. What we've got here is the underset limestone at the top, then platey, gritty beds, sort of shaly, hard shale, soft shale, sandstone, thin limestone, and the Preston grit. Preston grit is at the back side of the knot. Unfortunately that was a productive bed of rock. There's quite a considerable ore chute going down through the veins there. Then all in front of us there's Wet Groove's cross vein runs in front of us and along the slope of Iverscar across to Ellerbeck. Just have a quick look at the section. I'm going to show you the section again later, but here we have the veins penetrating the rock way down below our feet. Between the front edge here, we're on the back slope of Horebank. Horebank slopes down very, very steeply. Not quite 45 degrees, but something approaching 45 degrees. That's made of middle limestone. The miners call it Keld Heads limestone. And this whole plug of block of ground in front of us has been completely shaken up. All these beds and other beds are all jumbled up in this area here. Quite a lot of it's mineralised. This blue shaft there going down to the east level, Horebank level at the bottom there. We'll go and see that later. In about 1540, John Leyland, a writer and geographer of the day, wrote in his diary, "There to a great rock with my Lord Scrope, where my Lord Scrope seeketh for lead ore." It seems most likely that the knot was the great rock. It would have been the scar above, but this is probably the most likely site for Lord Scrope's mining in 1540. The Scropes owned most of the north side of Wensleydale, from the edge of Carpetby parish right down to Laban and a little bit beyond. The Scropes descendants, the odd Pollets, still own Bolton estate, or most of it anyway. Here at the knot, you just see the openings into what were flats, which were replacement deposits, where the lead ore, the vein has penetrated into the bedding planes of the rock and deposited lead ore. You can say it's got every appearance of being very early workings. I think certainly 16th century or earlier, maybe very much earlier. records for the mine are very vague, probably incomplete, well certainly incomplete I think. They were working in 1668 when there's at least 7 miners working, and they're working in shafts all along the vein here. In 1752 the mine made a profit of £170. In the 1760s the profits varied from £259 to £122. There would be long periods of abandonment, but I think it's fair to say that over 1,000 years of history the mine would have produced a considerable amount of ore, quite a few thousand tonnes. Now if I pan around from the knot, go around to the left, around to the west, and you can see just here straight in front of us, that's one of the bows teams for wet grooves level. Wet grooves level is there, and the tips from the level go out that direction then to the west of us. Then if I pan around again just behind us, back around to the knot again, and then down into what remains of Plew's shaft. Plew's was probably one of the late 18th century agents to the mining companies. There was a John Plew's working at Cobscar in 1762, so it's probably named after him, or a date from the late 18th century. Another view of Plew's shaft. Rucksack's on the edge of the shaft there. The shaft was sunk 180 feet down to the east level at the foot of Horbank. It was certainly here in 1804, I think as I said before, it was probably dates from the late 18th century. In 1804 it was called an engine shaft. By engine, all they really meant was a horse engine. A horse engine was a circular drum with a rope wound around the drum, and a horse walked around the circle, winding the rope around the drum. 2 ropes went down the shaft. One let down an empty kibble, the other drew up a full kibble of waste or and all the kibble was, it was a large bucket, probably standing about this high, and sort of a semicircular shape, so that if it caught on the side of the shaft it didn't do any damage, it just bounced off the side of the shaft as it came up. This shows up. This is a section of knot vein. Here we have Plew's shaft, which is the shaft immediately behind the camera. There we have wet grooves level. Wet grooves level is there, just above that dry stone wall, into the hillside there. Just over on this side we've got it's called the Keld Heads limestone, and that's the slope of the valley over there. Right at the base of Horbank over to that side. The level was driven in to the foot of Blues shaft and on into knot vein. The knot is here. Now the level's actually closed up now. We're in the 1970s, 80s. We were able to get down into the workings and right down to Horebank level. Unfortunately at this point Horebank level was flooded with water. We couldn't get into any of the workings at the bottom here. It was only really this bit, part of there, and to about here somewhere. We tried to dig through this fall to find out what happened in the continuation of the level, but there was just no room to store any of the rubbish, and we couldn't get it back out to the surface anyway, so we had to abandon the dig there. And since then the level's completely closed up now. Wet grooves level. Just see the retaining walls either side of the level. The level ran straight into the hillside, straight into the millstone, into the Preston grid, and into knot vein. The level would be arched over. The arch would actually start about here. This is that side of the level, the other side of the level is here. It was arched over like that. We're driven as a horse level, so a horse with 4 or 5 wagons behind it would be pulled in and out of the wagon, in and out of the level. You just see the depression at the back there where it's running. Then if I pan around to the west, just see the fan of a waste going out to the west, and there's another slight bit across to the south there. If you haven't been already, it's well worth a visit to the Dales Countryside Museum at Hawes. They have a collection of artefacts collected by the EB Mines Research Group and some other groups like Northern Mines. The artefacts were collected from the 1940s onwards, and you'll see examples of kibbles. There's a keystone for Wet Grooves level there, 1859. It's well worth a visit, please go. On the northern slope of Ivy Scar slope that way. These are open cuts, open cast workings on knot vein. The main one here, another one to the left, there's another one slightly to the right. They extend about 400 yards to the north. The vein continues, but there's probably barren through there too. Factuate. The next scar is actually the same limestone as we stood on here, but the whole bed in this part of the geological basin is tilted down away from the scar there. Then the northern scar, blue scar, is of maiden limestone. You can see from the way that the miners dug out the vein, the old name for a mine was a grove or a groove, which fits the description perfectly. The miners themselves, at least the old miners, call themselves groovers. I think here we're talking about mining in the 16th century at the latest. Probably quite a lot earlier, very much earlier I would think. And here I've come down to the Vale Hills below the open cast workings. You can see the edge of the rubble on the side of the open cast up there, the Brighton limestone. Then down here around my rucksack it's an area of smelting. Vale Hills, certainly 16th century, but I think probably very much earlier. The first smelting mill was built in Wensleydale in 1579 down at West Whitton. There was another one between Preston and Wensley, must have been built shortly after. And from then on, all the smelting was done at purpose-built smelting mills, which were much more efficient. And a lot of the waste that would have been left piled up here would have been taken down to the smelt mills to be re-smelted. The big grey slag, black slag. With quite a reasonable percentage of lead left in it. As you can see, very little grows where lead has been processed. Lead ore in itself isn't poisonous as such, but once it weathers, once it's smelted, it becomes far more dangerous and toxic to both vegetation and animals. Now as I move down the slope from the open cast workings there on the right, I'll come down, there's an old trial level there, centre. As far as I know, it never produced any lead ore. The vein from there on was probably barren, and coming back this way it would have been worked out. As we go down the valley, down the slope from Ivy Scar, down to Ellerbeck, there is the rest of Wet Grew's mine. In the very front there, I don't know which shaft, probably the first of the big ones was Cow Shaft. Next to that was Thomas Calvert's shaft. Ellerbeck cuts down through the workings, and on the other side there is a hush, which is in the parish of Woodhall, which is a completely different mineral royalty. I'll just move down to the workings on Ellerbeck. This is a northern, most westerly part of Wet Grew's mine itself. Thomas Calvert's shaft there, and to the left of it is the Cow Shaft. Almost certainly 18th century shafts. Then I'll pan around a bit to the west. Now we look towards the west. You can see Ellerbeck cutting down through the hillside, through the mine. On the far side is that delve, which is a hush. A hush is an open cast working. All they did was manually cut out the limestone and other rocks, cut down to the vein, mine the lead ore out of the vein, dig down a little bit further. eventually the bottom of the hush would get full of rubbish, soil, all sorts of stuff, obscuring the vein, so they would build a dam at the top side of the hush, then periodically release the water from the dam. That would wash down the hush, clean out all the smaller waste, all the rubbish, and expose the vein again so they could dig down further. It looks as though most of the workings were actually on this side, on the Bolton Estate side of the beck, Woodhall being the west. And to drain these workings in the lower levels, they drove a hose level from Aithwaite End, which is the west end of Hallbank. And we'll go down and see that shortly. Now we've just come down to the bottom of Hallbank, the west end of Hallbank, Aithwaite End. This is Aithwaite End level, or the west level. It's quite filled up now. It would have been quite a bit deeper, so it would have been 6 foot high at the crown, above the rails at the bottom, and about 4 feet wide. There's probably more than one level here. This one was driven straight northwards to the mines in Ellerbeck, where the hush was. We dug into it in the, I think 1980s it would be. We had a sketch plan of it, but when we got in there, the sketch plan didn't relate to the level particularly well. All we found was a straight level. William Craig of the Wensleydale Wet Grooves Mining Company had originally planned to drive a level to the west into Woodhall Liberty. Lord Bolton didn't agree with that idea, so that was never done. But we have a sketch plan which showed another drift going to the east towards the old workings at foot of Ivy Scar there. So we're not quite sure what happened. I'll pan round to the left. So if I pan round to the left there, you can't see a great deal apart from a tree in the valley. We're in the corner over there is Disher Force, and in the bottom at the other side of the beck there is a level which was driven towards Woodhall mine, which is in the neighbouring Liberty, outside the Bolton Estate. The level was never completed. We'll sort of pan around again. We'll maybe have to move the camera a bit. There's a tree there, but at the other side of the tree are the tips from the level in Woodhall Liberty, while the tips from this level, very unusually, they go uphill to start with. So we're not quite sure what's happening here. It's a very steep rise out of the level here onto that tip. There are other tips lower down which might have come out from here more on a level. There might actually be more than one horse level driven from here. There's one was planned in 1765 to drain the old workings. So it may be that either this one or another one close by was driven to drain the old workings under Ivy Scar at Wet Grooves. And the tips from this point here, there may be some sort of other later working, just can't really work out what's going on. Anyway, we'll move on down to the east level at the foot of Hallbank. Now here we are at Hallbank level, or the east level, right at the foot of Hallbank. The road's behind us. The level's driven down in an incline into the hollow there, and driven straight forward to Wet Grooves lead mine. I think this must have actually been a later opening. About 200 yards further down the stream there's another level, and that runs up along and joins this level about 40-50 yards into the mine to drain the water away. You can see the tips from the level running out to our right. So this has been the main level for the mine. It made sense to drop the ore from the mine into horse wagons, pull the wagons out and rest the waste at the bottom of the mine. Now the Whitgreaves Mining Company took over in 1843. William Craig was the agent, and the first thing they did was reopen the Flues shaft and reopen this one. And as I say, it was probably them who drove this incline down into what would probably be an existing level. The existing one may have been driven in 1765. Now in 1857 the Whitgreaves Mining Company was reconstructed legally by shareholders. John Reid was the major shareholder, and the wording in the lease prevented them adding extra shareholders during the term of the lease. Lord Bolton wanted to make sure that he knew exactly who he was dealing with. But no sooner had the mining company been reconstructed than John Reid and William Craig, they started trading the shares through Gledhills, who were stockbrokers of Leeds. Not surprisingly, Lord Bolton was not impressed. And in 1867 he took the chance of stopping the lease, not renewing it. William Craig carried on certain ventures in Wensleydale. He had a mine up near Hawes at Raygill, and as I've said before, he was working Woodhall mine to the west. But by 1871 all of William Craig's ventures in the Dale had come to an end, and towards the late 1870s lead mining in the Dales was really beginning to decline, and by 1880 most of the mines had closed up, certainly all the smaller ones. Here we are back at the old mine again, in front of a random modern brick wall, raised block wall. Seems how to fit in with the rest of the mine. But in actual fact, in 1959 GT Minerals began processing the old waste. What they were looking for was fluid spar. A few pieces here, little piece there, yellow greenish bright spar. It's much lighter than the rest of the minerals. There's blue spar there, there's varieties there which is much heavier, not quite as heavy as lead ore, but still sort of halfway between limestone and lead ore, the blue spar being lightest of all. And GT Minerals, they reprocessed all the waste over there in the old mine. There must have been many feet of it. They worked right through the 60s. I remember them working. During the first 10 years of working the tips over, they got 15 tonnes of fluorspar a week. That's apart from the winter months. They needed a good flow of water to the mechanical jigs and flotation cells. The flotation cells floated off the lighter fluid spar. So obviously the winter months when everything was frozen up, they couldn't work. Although Tom Keaton, who still lives down in Woodhall, told me that when he started working here as his first job after leaving school, he said he remembers at least once working through a blizzard. William Taylor, who was one of the partners, he continued working into the early 70s. They reconfigured the plant a couple of times, and I think actually William would build this block wall probably later on. So over the life of their working, if you take 15 tonnes a week, 40 weeks in the year, plus the little bit that William got when he was working part-time, they probably got somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 tonnes of fluid spar. The fluid spar was sent off for a flux in making high-grade steel. I think most of it went down to Sheffield. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our 1,000 years of history, and maybe many more years. Let's take a break there. Well, I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. It isn't easy for me to do. Camera and tripod had blown over twice, even though I put my rucksack as a weight to the bottom of it, but I suppose I've already had my bait, so most of the weight's gone out of it. Just walking across there, I just noticed this. It's a plug. It's what the old miners used to split off the rocks underground. They'd find a crack in the rock and drive plugs at distances along the crack, split the rock open. They'd have what they call feathers on either side. Feathers of metal. They would drive in as a wedge and split everything apart. Now, I said before, if you get a chance, go to the Dales Countryside Museum at Hawes, and there's all sorts of these sort of things that the EV Mine Research Group have gathered. Well, just to explain a bit, I suffer with fibromyalgia. That basically means chronic fatigue and brain fog. It really is debilitating. The only way that I can really effectively give a talk, I can't stand up and give a talk for half an hour. I just get lost. So the only way I can do it is by making these videos. Guided walks aren't so bad. You know, you can go for a walk, and as long as I keep stopping every now and again, get a chance to gather my thoughts. It's actually much easier being able to show something, point things out, rather than having to just describe them. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it, and goodbye till next time.